Welcome back.
And we're moving into our third and final segment for the morning, the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, the LiDAR system, the 5 Cs. In with us, we actually have Dr. Ulric Trotz. He is a Deputy Director, Science Advisor at the 5 Cs. Sir, good morning and welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you in the travel from Belmopan all the way to Belize City. Let's venture off into it. For me, it's something that I'm just getting used to, the LiDAR system. And the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. Let's talk a little about the 5 Cs and what do they do?
Well, the 5 Cs is a regional organization. It was set up by CARICOM heads. They made a decision about its establishment in 2002.
Okay.
And our role basically is to coordinate and direct activities in the region dealing with building resilience to climate change. Essentially, our role is to provide the knowledge base for decision making and how you build climate resilience.
Okay.
So we're doing the analysis. You're talking about climate change. What climate change you're talking about? So we have a group doing the climate modeling, looking at projections for the future to tell you what you have to prepare for. Then we look at what is vulnerable across the Caribbean. We are coastal communities.
Yeah.
So all of our coastal infrastructure, coastal population, all of our ecosystems or mangroves or reefs, these are issues that we have to consider. Your agriculture, your tourism sector, your health sector. So we identify these as being vulnerable. And we do the work using the projections for future climate to show what the impacts of that future climate would be on these different sectors. And then we look and see what steps do we take to ensure that were we to experience, well, I shouldn't say were we, when we experience that type of climate, what we have will not be destroyed. This is something that in our language, climate change language, they say adaptation to climate change. So we do that. We go further than that. We look at several options and we calculate, we do the cost benefit analysis, and then we present to the policymakers a range of options, and they'll decide at which point they'll make an intervention and implement what we recommend. So that essentially is our role.
5 Cs.
Now, Dr. Trotz, I wanted to ask, beyond a regional perspective, just how we're preparing to go to COP. I'm sure you're probably going to be there yourself.
No, it's too cold.
you're opting out of the COP.
Our colleagues are there from the center. Your own Carlos Fuller is there. Carrying that ball.
But the importance of this conversation right now is being able to look at how the world is viewing and receiving information about climate change. And we have two very distinct conversations taking place. One, which unfortunately is being led by a very powerful country, the United States, with President Trump's comments on climate change, dismissing what had been embraced by the prior administration there. And then you have the rest of the world that has been trying to do their own works in meeting the intended targets. And countries like us, where we have been and continue to experience the direct implications of what is climate change. How do you, from where you sit at the 5 Cs, how do you put this all into context as to whether or not we are progressing in being able to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change?
Well, how much time we have?
Well, we got to get the TV version, but it is a dynamic time. Yes.
Well, let's start with the Paris Agreement. A couple of years ago, we had a global agreement ratified by all countries, which was phenomenal, for us to work towards ensuring that by the end of this century, global temperatures would not exceed 2 degrees centigrade. It wouldn't be higher than 2 degrees centigrade of what it was before the Industrial Revolution. This is from 1851 or so. That that was the global situation. We, of course, in the Caribbean, since 2009, when there was a Copenhagen conference, we had led the charge, which was espoused by small island developing states and quite a few developing countries to say, no, 2 degrees is too high for us, 1.5. And our mantra, we developed a 1.5 to stay alive. So that was what we were hoping. So we came out from Paris pretty optimistic.
The world was celebrating.
Yes, we were celebrating. But we realized there were a few weaknesses in the Paris Agreement. The first and the most serious one is that all countries are supposed to more or less say what they intended to do, especially the developed countries, to cut back the greenhouse gases. But it was voluntary.
Okay.
There was no sort of compulsion or no penalties if they didn't meet their obligations. So that left it at countries' discretion.
Yeah.
And right now we are calling for a revisit to what countries have stated they would do, where we refer to as bigger ambition. That is that they need to commit to cutting the greenhouse gases much quicker. We right now, on the business as usual scenario, the way we are going right now, the recent report that came out from the IPCC tells us that 1.5, even the 1.5, we might hit it in 2030 and not at the end of the century. So you see how the discrepancy, we have a lot of problems there. Now let's look at what has happened with America. They have withdrawn from the climate agreement. That's a big shock. But you know what people don't realize is that although at the highest administrative level, they don't, you get the impression that nothing is happening. At the other level, at the state level, at the community levels, we have a coalition of cities and mayors throughout their states who are promoting renewable energy, who are looking at the green economy, and who are actually taking action to deal with their carbon footprint. Now, the other unfortunate development has been recently with Brazil. Brazil was one of the leaders in terms of developing countries pushing for the Paris Agreement. But with the new administration, the new president basically has, the rhetoric before election was that they were going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement.
Wow.
We are happy that that has toned down a bit. But Brazil was slated to host this big climate meeting, which is now taking place in Poland. They were slated to host it next year, and they have just withdrawn that offer on the grounds that they don't have the resources to host it. So we are very concerned about that. Of course, as you know, Brazil has one of the Amazon, which is one of the critical ecosystems for sequestration of carbon dioxide.
Important.
Very important.
Like our lungs in the earth.
And this, from the rhetoric, you get the impression that they are going to allow more of those forests to be cut down for agricultural land, plant soybeans, etc. So we are in for a very interesting period. And we hope that in the final analysis, good sense would prevail, and that as countries we'll all work towards basically getting the greenhouse gases under control.
But let me just ask, because what it has done, and I think, I don't want to give too much power to what these powerful critics are saying, but what it does is it politicizes the issue, where what would be, and we in the Caribbean are perhaps more comfortable because we are seeing and feeling the effects. So where we attribute things to climate change, others are a bit fearful of saying, it's because of climate change, not because of climate change, because it becomes a political conversation. I'd imagine that this is a big hindrance in keeping the relevance of the issue, and especially talking about the impacts on a global level. It makes it harder.
Well, what has happened recently, we were like the canaries in the mine in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And we are in a geographically, we are in a very vulnerable environment.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of other things, including our social issues, poverty, etc. So that's one part of the game. But we find that recently, look at the fires in California, floods in Europe, fires in Portugal. What is happening now is that in the developed countries where we really want action, they are now starting to experience some of the impacts of a changing climate. I'm not even saying climate change, of a changing climate. So there is a lot more awareness where we need that awareness. And people are connecting the dots. It's very interesting. Recently, it's only recently that you see the American news news houses starting to make a little mention of climate change when they talk about California or when they talk about a hurricane in Carolina. It's starting to seep into their lexicon. And if you look at news coming out from Europe, BBC or whatnot, they don't fool around. They make the connection.
They call it what it is.
They call it what it is. So it's going to take some time. What we are concerned about basically is action. For us in the Caribbean, there are two at the international level, and we've been very vocal and very effective. We need to press developed countries basically to take action to cut back on their greenhouse gases so that we can meet the targets that we're looking at. In our own area, we're living in a world that we'll say is committed to climate change. So what we have to do is to start to build the resilience.
What I wanted to follow up on is, we know one of the things we should be proud of as the Caribbean is how we essentially put our foot down, especially around the time of the Paris negotiations, to say that, it's not just that we're feeling the impact. We need your help to prepare for what will happen and to prevent some of the challenges. Have we seen a follow through in that commitment, in the resources coming down to help us with mitigation and adaptation?
That's the critical issue. We have basically tried to use a moral argument that we are in a situation we are simply because of your pattern of development. And that you should feel some sort of moral responsibility to ensure that we are in a position to protect ourselves from the consequences of your pattern of development. But they don't buy it. Our biggest fight is for resources. Now, out of the negotiations we've had, they have established the Green Climate Fund to fund climate action. They hope that it will be capitalized at the level of $100 billion per year, even though we need trillions to deal with the issues we have to deal with. But that's a start. We are very concerned with the pace at which they're getting to that goal. The fund started in about 2015. It was capitalized at the level of about $10.6 billion US dollars. Now,
and just to put that into perspective, because it sounds like a lot.
No,
it's not just the Caribbean, it's other areas that have been affected as well, other small islands.
No, it's not only the small islands, but all countries, including the large developing countries, Brazil, Nigeria, South Africa, India.
Yeah.
China. Yes, so we're a small fry in the pool. But our problem now, the fund has been established. The center and the Caribbean Development Bank are what we call regional implementing entities. Let me very quickly explain that.
Okay.
Previously, funds would flow through other mechanisms to our countries to implement action, but it had to come through the World Bank or the IDB or one of these big international organizations. And we fought for what we call direct access to the fund. So that the fund will disburse directly to a regional or a national institution.
Okay.
Like
So,
CDB.
yes, the CDB and the center are now accredited. We can now present projects to the Green Climate Fund on behalf of the region or countries in the region of up to $50 million per project, which is a grant. And for the CDB, they have the same ceiling, $50 million per project, but it's a mixed portfolio of grants and concessionary loans.
Okay.
I am proud to say, have been successful in getting one project approved for the Barbados Waters Authority. The total value is up to about $45 million US, of which 27 million is pure grant.
Okay.
And we are working now with countries basically to help them to develop the proposals for the Green Climate Fund. But there again, it's a very difficult process. The amount of information that they ask for, we have had to put together a project development unit, and they go around to countries and sort of work with local experts and other regional experts to put these massive proposals together.
Is Belize currently working on any proposal?
Actually, we do have a project that was approved for Belize. Something they run the Donax project, Wild Cane.
Okay.
We're working with Belize sugar industry and BL to look at a supplement for bagasse.
Okay.
As you know, the cogeneration plant, they can only generate the power during the season when they have the bagasse. So they're looking for a supplement and an alternative fuel that they can utilize when the bagasse isn't available.
Okay.
So the center is working with them to look at wild cane. The thing about it is, you see, it grows in not top agricultural lands, marginal lands. And it's we had some trial runs with the sugar industry, and the burn is excellent. So we've got a grant from the, it's about $700,000 through the GCF to do the preliminary feasibility studies, etc. So we could go after a much bigger, the 50 million, to help with the implementation of the project.
All right. So thank you for all that updates. But it is fascinating because the conversation as we head into COP is intensifying.
Yeah.
But, so there's a big development that happened this week as well. And that's actually where you're here to discuss.
Here we want to get. All right,
So
yes.
the LiDAR system,
Yeah.
you know, I think we saw the news stories, and it is very clear that this is a very big development for the country. I want you to take me back to how it was decided that it was something that we should venture into and make an investment at this point.
Well, when we started our work, we do what is known as a vulnerability assessment.
Yeah.
So we're looking particularly at coastal infrastructure, roads, airports, ports, your tourist plant, and where a lot of our people live. It's vulnerable because of where it is.
Yeah.
With sea level rise, you're looking at inundation. And with hurricanes, with storm surge, you're looking at flooding, inundation, and possibly loss of life. So the way you you approach the vulnerability study is that we have what are known as storm surge models. So for a category 1 hurricane, you can more or less simulate the storm surge, and you can look at how far inland it would go. You would understand where would be flooded, where you need to evacuate, and if you're going to build there, how you have to build to an event of that type of storm. So you do it for category 1, category 2, category 3. But guess what? Over the years, a lot of these studies have been done. And if you look at the end of each study, they regret that they don't have what they call near-shore bathymetry or topography. That's the elevation on land and the depth of the ocean. So we are going through a lot of guesstimates, and you couldn't be precise in terms of your recommendations for dealing with building resilience on the coast. Now, how do you get that information? Through the LiDAR. It's the technology that gives you that information. And why don't we have it? Because we had to contract it from overseas, and it is very, very costly. We couldn't afford it. And what happened is, if you needed LiDAR, you would engage with the consultants. You'll get the LiDAR data for the limited area you're interested in, not for the entire coast. And you pay the price for it. They then do the analysis and give you the information that you'll need to make a decision, but the data remains with them.
They own the data.
Yes, so if you need anything again, you have to go and pay again. The other thing about it is that we don't need that one-off sort of analysis. We need to be able to create a baseline and then to return time after time and monitoring change. And with climate change, that is critical. So we who were in the trenches long ago said LiDAR, we need LiDAR in the region. And what happens? The center is established in 2005, and Belize appointed as the executive director Dr. Ken Leslie, a very distinguished Belizean scientist. And his experience happened to be in lasers. He's a laser physicist. He was a senior research scientist at Allied Signals and had actually developed LiDARs. So he knew the inside out of LiDARs. So we were so excited, and we sat at him and we said, before you leave this job, we have to have LiDAR in the region. And it's the first developing country, or the first developing set of countries that own this particular system. We have a project which we are implementing now with USAID, the CCAP project, Caribbean Climate Adaptation Project. Is really for the Eastern and Southern Caribbean. But the center is here, and we convinced them, and to their credit, they agreed that this is a critical requirement for work, and so they funded it.
Total cost? What was the total
It's about $2 million US.
Wow.
And we, again, hats off to Maya Island Air. They decided to partner with us. This thing has to be airborne, and they provided the airborne part of the LiDAR system.
Wow.
So we now have a facility. Right now, as we are speaking, my colleagues, two colleagues at the center who Dr. Leslie trained, and they went to NOAA for further training, they're with the aircraft starting to establish a baseline and to calibrate the instrument.
Wow.
They don't waste
Yeah.
any time.
No, we don't have time. We don't have time. This is an urgent issue.
But you know,
You said, I just want to ask one thing. The $2 million investment, I think, is definitely worthwhile, because you spoke of one of the critical areas, which I didn't know. If you had gotten the LiDAR done from an external consultant, we would have never owned the data.
No.
So now whatever they are
The
able to
country
collect
owns it.
just this morning, that's ours.
Yes.
Till the end of time.
Yes, till the end of time. And you see, you do the surveys, you create a baseline, and then every 2-3 years you can go back and you can see what changes have taken place, etc.
Where do you see this having the most significant impact? In Belize, in the work being done in Belize, or in the rest of the region?
In the rest of the region. In the rest of the region, because we have to understand how to protect all of our investments on the coast. And we are coastal. So it's not only for that, it has several other uses. For instance, it can monitor our mangroves. It can
erosion.
Erosion issues. It can help agriculture.
Oh, great.
And as a matter of fact, I think your rice farmers use the laser leveling system already to decide the configuration of their drainage, etc., in the agricultural field. It will tell you that if you're building roads along the coast, how you should design the roads, how you should design the drainage system for the roads. So it's a very powerful tool, and we are very proud of the fact that we were able to move in that direction.
Okay.
Nice.
But if we didn't have Dr. Leslie at the head, there is no way we would have been able to do this, because we had to prepare the specs, etc., and to know what we would require from the. I don't have a clue. I'm a chemist. He's a physicist, so he was able to provide.
Ensure we get the right equipment for us as well.
And I think we have.
And so we have the expertise to keep the maintenance going and whatnot as well.
He started to. There are 2 Belizean member staff. Albert Jones, who used to be an instrument technician at the Met Office and is now with us.
Okay.
And a young Albert Gilhari, who came to us from the University of Belize, computer studies.
Nice.
2 excellent technical people who Dr. Leslie, from the time we decided to buy the system, started to teach them about lasers, etc. And then we sent them to NOAA. They have the identical system NOAA uses in the United States. So they did overflies with them to understand how to manage the equipment, etc. So we have an in-house capacity to manage the system.
Excellent.
What will this change in next year's hurricane season as we have any potential threat of a storm?
Well, I wouldn't be able to say. This year, as you see, was...
we were blessed.
Next year, they're predicting an El Nino type of environment, which isn't bad news for us. Unfortunately, it's the La Nina. The girls give us a lot of trouble.
La Nina.
La Nina. So we are hoping nobody really knows. What we are certain about, however, is that we are in for a period where we get more intense hurricanes. But it's not only hurricanes we worry about now. We get what we call extreme weather events. Heavy rainfall. You're getting as much rainfall in 3 weeks as you will get in 6 months. Your drainage systems, they aren't designed to take off that amount of water, and so you flood. This is why it's so important that we understand what the future climate is like. Because if you take your drainage, your engineers, when they design drainage, they depend on past climate. What sort of rainfall patterns you had. That no longer is valid.
So if we used to get a certain amount of inches and now that is changing because of climate change, we can't accommodate
you have to redesign the drainage systems. But there's another but with drainage, the new approach to drainage. What happens is that you get all your water in a short period and then you get an extended period of drought. So in designing your drainage system, you have to make sure that you also design a system for retention of some of that water so that it will be available when the drought comes along.
So there's a balance there.
Yes. So it's a whole new approach, and we are working. A lot of people, your people in agriculture, your people in tourism, all of them need climate information.
Okay.
And most of their decisions that involve climate depends on the past climate, past experiences. So we are saying, no, we now have information for you. This is what you have to prepare for. So let this be the basis for your new decisions. Yeah.
Fascinating conversation. But we are out of time. What I do love, though, is I can hear from what you're saying just how important of an achievement it is that we do have a LiDAR system for the region.
Oh, yes.
It's here in Belize. We want to say it's for Belize, but actually the Climate Change Center is regional.
It's
So it is
regional.
for the region.
It's not only, we have already started to get a few discrete inquiries from Central America.
Oh.
No, this is it's, as it says, a critical tool for planning and whatnot.
Yeah.
And our problems in developing countries, as usual, we know what to do, but we don't have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
And that's our biggest challenge.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in and explaining just how important this is and keeping the conversation about climate change relevant.
Thank you, and I hope we could continue this dialogue.
Absolutely.
Because it's so critical for the survival of our people in the Caribbean.
Absolutely.
All
right.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and take a final break, and when we come back, we'll have our wrap-up, so stay tuned.